My name is Katie Yates, and this is Season 6 of the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife's podcast, Fishing Game Changers. In this season, I'm back in the field with our talented staff to learn more about what they do, why they love it, and what drives them to apply their time and talent to the Maine outdoors. A few weeks ago, via Zoom chat, I caught up with MDIFW deer biologist Nathan Bieber.
I'm the deer biologist for Maine Fish and Wildlife. I've been here for about 3.5 years and some change now. I came here by way of Minnesota. Prior to that, I was in graduate school in Nebraska, and I'll go through my background maybe later on, but a lot of field jobs before that, some undergrad work in Minnesota, and that's where I spent most of my life, is in Minnesota.
Like so many others in this field, Nathan's interest in the outdoors started young.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I come from like a wildlife family, really. It was something I had to sort of grow into myself, but a big part of it was my upbringing, and that my grandparents who lived in Wisconsin, they owned a house on a couple of acres and they had a pond in their backyard. And I used to spend every summer out there as a kid up until age 12 or 13 or something like that, and all the holidays too. So I would just spend my time in their yard and working on their pond, stocking fish, doing weird experiments on the pond with the weeds and things, and catching bugs and all that kind of stuff. And then also in the late 80s, they bought some land in Waupaca County, Wisconsin, which is not too far from all the Leopold Sand County shacks. So it kind of grew up spending a lot of time in that sort of landscape on that 120-acre parcel there. And so I think it was just kind of my upbringing in Wisconsin and all the time that I had there on wild land.
Nathan started out his education pursuing not wildlife, but medicine.
I actually went into undergrad kind of directionless. I was really interested in wildlife and hunting and fishing in the outdoors, but I was pretty concerned that if I made a job out of it, I'd start to hate it. So I was really hesitant to go that route, and lacking something better to do, I figured I'll just be a doctor. Why not? All right. Despite the fact that I have zero interest in medicine or working with or on people, really, but my family was like, I'll be a doctor. It'll be great. So I started going down that path, and I absolutely hated it. My first 3 years in college, I was doing really poorly. My grades were abysmal. And so I went to see a counselor after I was put on academic probation, actually. And she's like, maybe you should just stop pursuing something you have no interest in. And for whatever reason, it had never clicked until that point. So we had some discussions about where I could go, and we switched my major to fisheries and wildlife. And after that, I was able to bring up my GPA to over a 3.0 and graduate in good standing. And
after sorting out his path in wildlife, Nathan bounced around the Midwest taking seasonal work on various species. If you've listened to past interviews, you know this is fairly common.
Yeah, after undergrad, I did about 4.5 years of different field jobs, worked all over the country with a lot of different species, worked with deer a couple times, prairie chickens and wolves and woodcocks, and some GIS work and prairie work, lots of different stuff, just learning different agencies, meeting different people, learning different techniques.
Nathan interviewed for his current position with the department in person, meaning he had to drive all the way to Maine from the Midwest. His interview was actually his first time in the state of Maine.
Yeah, it was quite an experience, I guess. It's weird to drive so far across the country on a wing and a prayer, but the interview went well, and we hung out in, Cascade Park, I think in Bangor, after the interview while they were deliberating, and they called us while I was sitting on a bench in the park and told me that I'd got the job. And that was the start, and that was pretty exciting and a big change for my life.
The work Nathan does depends on the season.
If it's kind of in the spring, I'm working through a lot of rulemaking and lawmaking stuff and setting permit numbers and recommendations for the year. Summer's more kind of a slower time for me, where we're not doing any field work really, so I have some more time to work on annual reports and work up data and things like that. And then in the fall, of course, you have the hunting season, so I have to go through collecting all the biological data and coordinating that, as well as disease sampling. And then winter has traditionally kind of been my research time of year, but our project for collaring deer is pretty much wrapped up now. So winter is going to be looking a bit different for me in the coming years, but it really varies by season. And
you mentioned the deer collaring project. Do you want to talk about what that is and what that entails?
Yeah, we've been collaring deer now for 7 years. As of this year is our 7th and probably final year. But the point was to collar deer in the winter, especially female deer, and look at what impacts whether or not our female deer are making it through the winter. So we wanted to collar deer all around the state to get different latitudinal gradient there, and over a period of years to catch different winter conditions. And then we'll be doing some modeling exercises to look at different winter related variables like snow depth and deer sinking depth and temperature and land cover and things like that to figure out what it is that most influences whether or not a doe is going to make it through the winter and be able to have fawns the next spring.
And by collaring, you mean you're putting a GPS collar on the
Yep.
does?
That's right. Yeah, we put a GPS collar on them. We've done some fawns as well. There's some study sites where we are not able to catch nearly as many deer as we like. So at some points towards the end of seasons, we'll just take almost whatever we can get, excluding bucks. So if we catch a fawn at the end of a season in some study sites, we would put a collar on it, but we're mostly looking at adult does. So the GPS collars themselves, they send 2 signals to a satellite each day, or they're supposed to.
Okay.
And those bounce back to our computer so we can see twice a day where the deer was hanging out. And then they'll also, if the collar sits still for about 4 hours at a time, it'll send us an email or a text message that says this collar hasn't moved in a while, this deer may be dead, you might want to check it out. And so at that point, we'll take the last GPS location we have and we'll go to the field to that point and see if we can find the deer. And then if we can't, the collar does have a VHF beacon on it too, a telemetry beacon. So we can use an antenna and kind of hone in from there and try to find the dead deer and what happened to it.
So it's pretty similar to what they did for the moose study, sounds like.
Very similar, yep.
Do you find that the deer move around a lot, or do they kind of stick in the same sort of general area?
It varies a little bit depending on where you're at in the state. In northern Maine, deer tend to migrate from wintering areas to summering areas, and those can be pretty spread out. Most of the time, if they're migrating, it's 10 or 15 miles between summer and winter range. But we've had a few that have gone in excess of 50 miles or so. But then as you move further south, sometimes we'll have a deer that just stays in the same place all year. So if they have good resources and good cover where they're at, and if conditions there are generally not too bad, they don't really need to migrate to winter cover. So they might stay put all year, but up north, they tend to migrate.
Could you elaborate a little on deer wintering areas?
Yeah, so in the winter, it's pretty rough time for deer. There's not a lot of food and the elements are pretty nasty. So what deer, especially in the northern part of the state and the western mountains, look to do is hang out in cover that can protect them from some of those nasty elements. So that usually means softwoods cover with good canopy closure, and ideally some sort of intermixed hardwoods that they can browse in when snow conditions are decent. But the gist of it is the softwoods are holding their needles all year. They're not losing them like a deciduous tree. So those needles will intercept snow and stop it. Good wind cover. So it's a little warmer for deer. And as they hole up like that too, they can kind of establish trail networks in the slightly shallower snow and follow those trail networks. And that lets them save quite a bit of energy getting around the landscape. So winter for deer is very different. They don't travel quite as much. They're not so concerned about keeping body weight up or gaining body weight. It's more about just maintaining until spring shows up. And in a year like last year, that's no problem. Or this past winter, rather, it's no problem. Even in far northern Maine, it was super easy winter for deer. But in the nastier winters, they may be holed up in cover like that for 3 or 4 months.
Usually when I ask our staff what their favorite part of the job is, they enjoy the seasonality and being outside. But Nathan, a board game enthusiast, has a different occupational highlight.
I guess something I really like doing, and I've been able to do it a lot lately as we're working on revamping the permit system. I really like the theory crafting side of things. I like to play board games a lot. So a lot of that kind of moving part stuff comes into deer management. And I've really enjoyed sort of that. And a system we put into place a couple of years ago to issue bonus permits at a sub-district level to target areas with high levels of deer-human conflict. That was fun to kind of piece all those little bits together and follow that whole process through rulemaking and through all the different meetings and see an idea through from conception all the way to implementation was really rewarding, and I enjoyed that a lot too.
It's not just board games that Nathan enjoys. He spends lots of his free time creating better wildlife habitat on his own property.
I really, especially since we bought a house with some land on it in the last couple of years, I really enjoy habitat work. So the land we moved on to, beautiful land, love it a lot, but it's super uniform. A lot of kind of 20 to 25-year-old densely packed in together trees and not a lot of openings and things. So I've been spending a lot of time cutting trees and creating wildlife openings and trying to encourage some regeneration and different things to come up. And then we've also got a couple cleared acres in front of our property too. And I've been messing around with mowing regimes in the grassy patches and letting some spots go long. And I grew a lot of native wildflowers from seedlings this year, and I'm trying to kind of start a little native wildflower prairie, and just these little land projects I find really fun and rewarding.
For final thoughts, Nathan encourages folks who have an interest in deer management, questions, comments, or concerns to contact him. You can visit mefishwildlife.com to find our contact page with emails and phone numbers for our headquarters and our regional offices.
You can send questions there. I love when I get questions from people and they're routed to the correct staff. So if you have deer questions or ideas, put them in there and they'll eventually make it to me. That doesn't mean that something's going to happen for sure. Most ideas, even ideas that are ideas from our staff folks, they stay at the idea stage. It's a really long process to take an idea all the way through all the different layers of approval and different votes and things with either the legislature or our advisory council or whatever the case may be. But get those ideas out there. It's very helpful, especially when we're convening interdepartmental groups or stakeholder groups. Really what we want is to gather information and intel and ideas in a lot of those meetings. So it's really helpful.
Join me next Monday as I chat with another one of our staff members and explore what it is that makes them a game changer. In the meantime, be sure to hit subscribe on your favorite listening app. And if you have a moment, leave us a review and let us know what you think. To learn more about this series and past episodes, visit mefishwildlife.com/changers.